Welcome to the meeting of the Joint Archives Advisory Board. First item on your agenda this afternoon is election of chairman. Do we have any nominations, please?
Hello, yes.
Yes, Councillor.
Proposing Councillor Jill Haynes.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder?
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Any other nominations? Thank you. It's over to you, Councillor Haynes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to this joint archive meeting, which I think everybody's going to find extremely interesting. I'd particularly like to say welcome to Elizabeth today. We did do sort of round the table introductions to start with. But I think what I'll do to start with is I'll move into election of vice chairman, and we'll do apologies, and then we'll do round the table introductions, if that's all right with everybody. So I would like to propose as vice chairman Councillor Mohan Ingham. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Matt,
I'm happy to second, yeah.
Thank you, Matt. So, thank you for that, Mohan. Do we have any members of the public here today? Can anybody tell me?
Catherine, can you see if anybody's watching from outside?
It's just that if not, we will dispense with calling everybody councillor something, and we'll be a little less formal. But if we have got members of the public, then obviously they don't know who is an officer and who is a member of the public. So then I will proceed to call you all by your councillor surnames. No, we don't think.
I think we better, just in case.
Oh, you think you'd better just in case, do you? I didn't think we had anybody. Okay. Fiona, have we got apologies for absence?
One apology, Councillor Leslie Deadman.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jill, just to inform you, I need to leave at 3, unfortunately, for a medical appointment, but I may be able to rejoin you if it's still going. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Biggs, that's very good. We will see how the second goes, but thank you for that. Item 4 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations that anybody wishes to bring up today? No, deathly silence, so I think we'll assume that that's okay. I said we would then go around the room. So I'm Councillor Jill Haynes. I have the portfolio for customer and community services at Dorset Council. Should we do Dorset councillors next? We've got Councillor Matt Hall there.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I'm Councillor Matt Hall. I represent Sherborne in the north of the county. I'm also chairman of audit and governance, and through a degree I have a huge interest in history and archives. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Biggs.
I'm Richard Biggs, representing Poundby Ward in Dorchester, and a long time member, I think over 10 years on this board. Thank you.
Thank you. And complete. Councillor Simon Christopher, is he with us today? Yes, he is.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Simon Christopher, and I represent the Marshwood Vale in the west of the county.
Thank you. Councillor Lengar, would you like to introduce your councillors from BCP, please?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mohan Iyengar, ward councillor for Canford Cliffs and Poole, and cabinet member in BCP for culture, leisure, tourism, sport, which obviously includes the archives and all things heritage. And by the way, just for everyone's, if it makes things easier going forward, if we are using councillor, feel free to call me Councillor Mohan if you wish, if that helps things along. Thank you very much, Jill. Can we go to Marion, Councillor Lepedvin?
Well, I'll take my lead from Councillor Mohan and say call me Councillor Marion, because I've also got a very dodgy surname. I'm a councillor for the Poole ward of Newtown and Heatherlands, and I'm also currently Mayor of Poole and therefore Chair of the Charter Trustees.
Thank you. Yep. And Nigel?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. First time in many years. Hopefully you'll hear and see me a lot more from now on, I promise. Councillor for Wallistown and Winton West Ward. And thank you for being patient with me over the last few years with my ignorance and non-attendance. Thank you.
Very welcome. Good. Good.
Okay. And then that's all of yours, is it? No.
And we have apologies from Councillor Leslie Desmond, who is in Commons Ward in Christchurch, but she it was something last minute, I'm afraid she couldn't be here. But send her apologies, and she'll be glad to join us next time. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So with that, Sam, can I hand over to you to do introductions for the other people who are with us today, please? So.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Yeah. Perhaps I could just firstly introduce our two guests, Elizabeth Oxburgh-Cowan and Heidi Bellamy, who will be presenting to you shortly this afternoon. Elizabeth, Heidi, perhaps you'd just like to say a couple of words.
Sorry, just trying to get off mute. Yes, following the impossible surnames route, I joined that club. So I'm a consultant archivist, and I've been working with Heidi on reviewing the Dorset Archive Service. Heidi?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm pleased to be joining this meeting today, and as Elizabeth said, I was supporting her in this review.
Thank you. And I think I'd like to welcome Matty Raudsap, who's I think his first time in one of these meetings from BCP. Matty, good afternoon.
Yeah, hi everybody. Matty Raudsap, Director of Customer and Business Delivery. I'm taking over the role that Chris Saunders previously adopted in relation to overall responsibility for the archive within BCP, along with Mehdi and others. Nice to meet you all.
And then Mehdi, hello.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Mehdi Bernard. I'm head of BCP Libraries, and I'm part of the officer group as well, working closely with Sam and with Michael Spender from Poole Museum. Michael sends his apologies this afternoon, but we have consulted closely and about the content of the report and recommendations. So I come bearing several people's burdens here with me. Thank you.
Thanks. And then we have Paul Ackroyd with us from Finance. Paul.
Thanks, Sam. Hello, everyone. Paul Ackroyd from Finance. Also, my colleague Andrea Houghton is listening in on the call as well. Thank you.
Hi, Andrea.
And I think we have.
Hello, everyone.
And I'd like to, yes, Lisa, I think. Hello, Lisa. I think that's everybody then.
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, everybody. Lisa Cotton, and I'm Head of Customer Services, Libraries and Archives for Dorset Council.
And having come from BCP, I think most of you would know her as well, so that's quite good. Is that everybody, Sam?
I think so, yes. I hope I haven't missed anybody out.
Fantastic. Right then, so the next item is item 5 on the agenda, which is the minutes from the last meeting. Everybody happy to confirm those minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I probably need a formal proposer. Anybody want to do that? Thank you.
I'll be happy to propose the minutes.
Thank you. And Matt Hall, Councillor Matt Hall, second. Thank you very much. Okay, move forward with that. Item 6 on the agenda. I do not believe there is any items or statements from the public. Can we just confirm that, Fiona?
I can confirm that. That's correct. Yes, thank you.
Okay. That brings us to the main body of the meeting today, which is to receive the report from the consultants on the Joint Archive Service. So I will hand over. Are you leading on this, Elizabeth, or is there...
Yes, I am. Yes, I'm going to lead on it, but Sam's very kindly going to share the presentation on my behalf.
I think the presentation has come out with the agenda as well, so if it's a bit small on your screen, you might find it better in your ModGov pack.
Great, thanks, Sam.
Have you got that, Elizabeth? Is that okay?
I have.
Yeah.
So, Jill, shall I crack on?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay, right. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for such a great turnout to this meeting. We're delighted to be meeting with you. We've spent, should we say, the last year working on this review. We are very grateful to everybody in Dorset and BCP who has managed to talk to us and work with us in a very difficult time. And it's been a fascinating piece of work. We've really enjoyed it. So today what we'd like to do is give you a very quick overview of the report. We know you've had it and you will have had time to read it. So this is very much just a reminder, and then we'd be very happy to take questions and enable you to think through what are the next steps to hopefully take some of these recommendations forward. So next slide, please. So the first thing I'd like to just posit to you is just to thinking about what are archives, because it's such a standard word we use, but as archivists we have a very specific concept of what we are thinking about. Next click, please, Sam. I'll talk you through this. So archives are the documentary byproduct of the activity of individuals and organisations retained for their long-term value. When you break that down, what it means is as individuals and organisations, we go through our lives churning out documents of all sorts, be they emails, photographs, films, handwritten letters. Just think of the things that you will have produced today. So you are creating a contemporaneous record. Next click, Sam, please, which gives you evidence and information about the events, decision-making, individuals, activities at that point in time. So these are really valuable for if you want to look back. This is what you are going to use, are the archives. Next click, please, Sam. But if you are going to do that, you need to protect 4 values. First of all, the authenticity. It is what it claims to be. You can trust it that it is what it is. Secondly, that it's reliable, that it's conveying accurately an event or a decision. Doesn't mean to say it's not from a certain point of view, so it will be biased, but you know, you could go away saying this meeting was interesting, or you might write in your email it was a boring meeting. Those are both reasonable views. To say the tap dancing elephant was an absolute killer would be untrue. So this is what we mean about reliability. It has integrity, i.e. has sufficient coherence to actually have meaning and sense. And finally, that it's usable and that you can actually access it. And this is true not only for the physical record, but even more so for the digital, which very nicely leads me on to the next slide, Sam, of what is digital preservation. So if we take that concept that you are trying to maintain these records because they are what enables you to look back in time, you've got to be able to do that both with analog records and with digital records. And this is what archive services are all about. And we are now moving into an era where we are trying to look after the digital record. And I want to just bring this to your attention because there is a real danger of thinking if you shove a Word document in a folder called archive, you have done digital preservation. It is very far from the truth. What you need to do is have a whole set of procedures, technologies that enable you to identify and secure that digital record, ensure it doesn't get corrupted, ensure that it is still readable, and ensure that you can distribute it to people. Other people can look at it and in a legal manner. So, you know, recognizing you meet FOI and GDPR. And this is also what a good archive service does and what the Joint Archive Service does. So I just wanted to present you with those 2 concepts so that you understand you can keep coming back to them as you think about your archive service. Next slide, please, Sam. So what about Dorset's archive service? What about it? Well, I'm not sure I've ever written in a report before that it is an exemplar service. You have a very good archive service on your hand. It has very good collections. It has a good, high quality, diverse range of engagement with audiences. It's one of the first to actually get a mature digital preservation process going because it's quite a complex process to put in place. It's very good at reaching out to other institutions and across the archive profession. In the archive profession, we very much learn from each other. If you're a good networker, you can get a lot out of that. And it's good at income generation. I'll come back to it. So this is a strong service. You've got a firm foundation to build from. So if we could have the next slide, please. But there is still more that can be done. And you know, the report goes back very often to about the archive service is not recognised as a useful internal business support for both its funding councils around that whole concept of managing the corporate record. And we'll come back to that. You'll see it's quite a theme. This is in many respects the primary role of a good archive, a local authority archive service. It needs to be connecting with audiences across the county of, and when I say county, I mean Dorset and BCP, so I'm using a rather historical term for county, but it's not connecting with the range of audiences that it should be, and particularly down in BCP, there's a definite gap there. It has far more potential to engage in health and well-being and community agendas, and very much support the council's own aspirations around growing their communities and supporting their communities. And leading on from that, you know, cultural tourism, which I appreciate has more to give generally across Dorset and BCP anyway. The archive service has a good contribution to make there. And finally, the archive service has a real role to be as an intellectual hub, talking to the universities of Exeter and Bournemouth. They love working with the archive service, and there's far more to do there. And in doing so, working with the universities and supporting young people in particular across the region. Next slide, please. So we get on to the areas that we were asked to consider, and governance is, I think, the area that caused us most concern, and we would urge you to really put some energy into. As the governance currently stands, it can't really be effective. It only meets once a year, and there's very little input into the strategic focus of the service and its work plans and major decisions. And often discussion is purely around the budget. And in doing so, you're just not getting enough from your archive service. You can input into your archive service and make a more dynamic and connected part of what the council does. And also it puts a big demand on the library service as being the primary conduit between Joint Archive Service and BCP Council. So there's a lot of stress being taken in one place, if you like. And it comes down to this basic fact of the archive service is not recognised across the two councils as a useful business service. It's, if people are aware of it, they know it as the history centre. And that's not necessarily very helpful. It might just be seen as a niche, nice to have service when actually it's got a lot more to give. So next slide, please, Sam. So as you'll see, we've made some very clear recommendations around the governance, where the Joint Advisory Board, the Archives Advisory Board, really supports and nurtures and grows the archive service, but also demands things of it, you know, makes that archive service work for its funders. And so you'll see in the report, we've talked about developing and revising the terms of reference, having a broad membership, so you get broader views and you can, you know, connect more into the everyday activity of the councils and meet more regularly and really get that strategic engagement with the archive service, but also get engagement with some of those high level operational decisions. So for example, I've talked about collecting and the advisory board actually being involved in some of the development, particularly around the collecting policy and some of the key collecting decisions. Next slide, please. Likewise, we've touched on audience development, and there has been a really interesting range of audiences that the archive service already engages with. But, you know, there's always room for development and improvement. And so we've come up with these three categories of those existing audiences that you either grow or you maintain, and those new audiences that you want to pull in. And they're all listed there. But hopefully, again, it follows this idea both of serving the councils, but also more diverse engagement across local communities. And also recognising that it's not going to always be the archive service that might be the primary connector with an audience. It might either work in a partnership, or it might be the expert advisor, and that would be particularly true around health and well-being work. That might well work well, or if it's in a commissioning role, those kind of things. Next slide, please. Right, and what I also wanted to then look at was moving on from audiences, the type of services that you could you know, how you would deliver those services to those audience. And it's very much a question, as you will know, within wider council services, how do you make that balance between digital and place-based services? And obviously both councils are driving hard to put digital at the heart, in the aim of having very seamless services for their residents, where not only can they easily connect to any services they need in a sensible, joined up manner, but also that your residents can actually talk to you as organisations. And really, I've just got this little diagram to sort of identify what you will already know, that users now are far more familiar with the digital. I appreciate there are some audiences and users and residents that are not, but it is the more commonplace, and therefore you've got high user expectations around what constitutes a digital service. You've also got in the physical that the on-site facilities for the archive service, they're limited. And they're simple. There's you know, they do their job, but should we say there's nothing showy about them. And you've got this sort of issue that when you're doing physical interaction with an audience as an archive service, is actually quite costly, if you like, in terms of personnel. It's very much almost a one-to-one, and you're reaching a small audience, maybe one person or maybe a small group, but you also get a very high quality experience, and that's the thing we really want to get across. The physical is very high quality. You interact with knowledgeable staff, and you get to interact with the physical collections, which, you know, is the kind of real best bit about being in an archive service, is actually interacting with those wonderful documents. But you've got this issue of you're in a very large county across Dorset and BCP, and you've got online content already available that you can build on, and the archive service has already made a good decision about investing in a software facility called Apexio, which really opens up your capacity to connect people digitally with collections. So that's the context within which we're working about. Do we go for digital or do we go for a physical service? Next slide, please. So what we're saying is that because of the breadth of both the geography and the range of people the archive service would like to connect with, and the limited number of personnel it has, that digital, like across the rest of the councils, starts to become the primary delivery channel. And we see that as splitting two ways, actually, that there's a digital channel that is focused purely on servicing the councils internally around managing the corporate record, and that is badged accordingly, and one moves away from this history centre badging, which isn't really helpful for identifying what it can provide to the councils. And then on the other side, having a public facing delivery service, which is more culture and history orientated, with things like an image bank and curated content that might target particular localities or communities, and use up possibly access technologies such as there's a very good one called Know Your Place that has been very big, particularly down in the southwest, and that users can engage two-way. They can talk to the service, they can reminisce, they can contribute, and there's a whole area of practice now opening up about that, but also that you can support people with development of skills and understanding, and you can also link into other providers, other cultural providers, but also, for example, around health. So the digital is very much where we see the development. Next slide, please. However, the place-based, the physical is still important for that high quality interaction. And we're saying choose carefully, choose well. And the primary area, of course, of physical activity is on site. So talking to Sam and thinking about how they use the search room where people go and look at original documents. We're talking about a more slimmed down service. So they've been using appointments only in lockdown. Let's try that again. Let's trial it and see if that works without degrading the service to, you know, there's long-term physical users too much. And meanwhile, take yourself out into the community in judicious ways, particularly with Talks programme, but also working with other providers, and also going into the councils to help them understand the kind of services that the archive service could provide. Next slide, please. Income generation wasn't something else we were asked to look at. We've put an analysis within the report, so I'm not going to go into that in great detail, other than to say that the Archive Service has worked hard on income generation, and it nearly matches over the last 5 years the funding that has come from the individual councils. So it's kind of almost a third of the generation income, and it has looked hard at all these things. So there's not kind of some magic area that the service has ignored, and we've looked across other services, and it's very comparable. It does well against other services in its income generation, and also the ideas where it might go. Next slide, please, Sam. But there are areas, and I think the primary area is around helping the councils manage their corporate record efficiently. And really it's a cost saving rather than an income generator, but there's definitely a role to be played there. And then, as you'll see in the report, we've suggested to continue doing income generating activities, but only over certain areas, and bringing in certain new areas as well, but recognising that there's a cost to those and a capacity. And on that basis, there might be an argument for bringing in a commercial manager to actually drive income generation, and also customer management around the services that they pay for. But I appreciate that funds are very tight, so we've said that, you know, this might be a part-time post, it could be a post shared across several services, and that we would expect it to be self-financing if nothing else. So that's one to think about. Next slide, please. And then finally on to collection management, which is around the core asset of your archive service. What are the records you're holding? And there are very rich collections within the archive service. We've also said that there's really not much room for quick rationalisation. If you look in the report, you'll see I've done a little sort of a brief calculation about the rationalisation that could happen and how little return you'd get for the 9 years of man or staff time you would need to do that. So so collection management is around how to create and manage a good historical record. So first of all, going back to this idea of enabling the councils to manage their own corporate record well, we would strongly suggest that the Corporate Risk Register has a specific entry around managing the corporate record, and that there is, within the archive service, there is a dedicated area of activity around supporting the councils to manage that corporate record, and that you get engaged, the archive service gets engaged in the digital transformation of both councils. But I know BCP I talked to, and they've got a lot of work going on there, but also Dorset. And that the advisory board is actually involved in collection decisions and policy, because there are some big issues to be sorted out here. So to have that strategic and wider involvement across the council is very useful. We would also like to suggest that you create the Centre for Creative Archives. Now, this in the initial stages actually doesn't require very much. What it's about is identifying you have a fantastic resource in Creative Archives, which is a really attractive proposition in many ways. And so why not bring that to public attention by identifying them and branding them as a collective? And then you can use that as a springboard to engagement, but also fundraising, with the aspiration that you can then, in the slightly longer term, seek out capital investment funds for a new storage and maybe access facility for Creative Archives. So you create a really interesting offer around which funders would be very interested. Certainly the Lottery Fund, I know, would be very taken with that kind of approach. And the ultimate aim is that you end up with a rich, relevant collection. So next slide, please, Sam. So why do all this work? For the value that it can drive. First of all, it drives a lot of qualitative value. So you will have a secure civic record, which if you ever found yourself in court, you would be really grateful for. But you have a really secure, robust cultural asset. But then you have an environment in which your community can meet, in which you can bring in diverse partners to work together, and you can work towards that sense of place and heritage and the identity for your community. And you can also use it as a mechanism for reaching out into communities which are hard to reach, but also pull them in. And archive volunteering is proved very popular in lockdown, but has proved also to be very good for mental health in the long term. So there's a lot of qualitative value to be driven from this. But what about the quantitative? Next slide, please, Sam. The quantitative value is harder to define because it hasn't been defined, and Sam and I have had some long, frustrated professional discussions about this very fact. And so what one has to do is almost look for where there are small amounts of evidence where this has happened. And so just talking about the secure corporate record, and I'm sure as councillors and officers you will actually be very, very aware of this, that the better you secure your corporate record, the less risk you put yourself out, both financially and in reputation terms. And I've just put there, for example, an example of a fine that the Information Commissioner's Office gave against Kensington and Chelsea for failing to manage details of property owners properly and releasing them accidentally. Secondly, you do get lower storage costs and carbon footprint. So obviously that's less financial cost and less environmental cost. Again, it's hard to quantify that, but I have seen figures that say 30 to 70% of records in an organisation are duplicates. There's no doubt that organisations do hold duplicate records. So if you can manage that immediately, you're getting through a very reasonably quick win about reducing that kind of storage cost. This is something that the next figure I just came up with, about the possible costs, those hidden costs of not managing information well. So American example of enterprise employing 1,000 knowledge workers wastes $48,000 a week or $2.5 million a year due to inability to locate and retrieve information. Now I understand that your councils, let us say, employ somewhere in the region, I think, of about 4,000 people. So, how many people of those sit at desks? Certainly probably 1,000. So you can start to say, okay, these figures might have some relevance to how we operate within our councils. One thing we came across in our interviews was that BCP actually commission architects to redraw historical plans when they've had new developments sometimes, because they don't realise that the original plans were transferred over to the History Centre a couple of decades ago. So there's a cost straight away that you could raise. And then the whole concept of using the archives in health and well-being. Again, it can be difficult to quantify this, but I thought this was quite a useful statistic that in Rotherham, a social prescribing pilot felt that they got sort of a three times return on investment from social prescribing, and heritage and cultural bodies have proved interested and capable of being involved in those social prescribing. So that's just a few examples to try and give you a sense of there is a financial return, but it can be hard to quantify. Next slide, please. So you have a very good service asset in the archive service. It is solid and it does things well, but there is room for far more engagement, both with the councils and audiences. But I would urge you, as the funders, it's going to require more engagement from the councils themselves to recognise that potential. So we would be absolutely delighted to take questions about the report and also discuss with you how you might like to take this forward from this meeting. Thank you, Sam.
That's great. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that presentation. So it was a huge amount of work that's gone into it. I'm sure everybody has read through the full report. I just wondered if there were anybody who wanted to raise any questions. If you could put right to speak in the chat bar, it's probably easier for me to see it than it is to raise a hand. But if you want to raise a hand, either virtually or by physically waving your hand around, I'll see if I can see you. Yeah, anybody? Mohan, you want to kick off?
Yeah, I'll try all three different forms, Jill. So I'll start with the old style. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks for the work done on all of this. Really thorough, and we obviously saw some of this last time. And thank you for the refresh on this. Yeah, there's nothing in your report that I'm sort of going to dispute, which I think is kind of a judgment or something which is wrong. There's nothing of the sort. But what it makes me think is kind of same as last time is this, this word about the archive service being relevant to to a much wider group of people, and relevant sounds like quite a dowdy word, lowball if needs be, quite tawdry, quite sort of not very ambitious and so on. I think it is the appropriate word, because we've got, if I may pick on something you said earlier, but it's almost to make a more general point, is that we talk about, this it's not recognised, and agreed. It's not sufficiently recognised, but the solution to that is not to go sort of with some rah-rah in the two councils to say, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me, and try and co-opt more people onto this board, or to try and do some roadshows in the two councils, because that's not getting to the nub of it, in my opinion. Okay. So many things I'd imagine in both our councils go unrecognised, which are extremely worthy. The challenge, I think, for archives and for all of them is how can we make what the archive service does relevant and really, demonstrably relevant to the working lives of a very large number of people. And I don't think we're there yet. And please, Sam's here and everything, despite the fantastic work that's been done, nothing I'm saying now is any aspersion to what's been done hitherto, but going forward there's a real challenge here, which is we either carry on in sort of a benign way, keeping going the service that it's going now, and then in a sense we deal with the sort of the issue coming up like this, which is the maxing out of the DHC. And if we chose to, we could just do a tactical solution to that, which is okay, let's bolt on a bit at the back and buy ourselves sort of whatever, 5, 6 more years, 10 more years more capacity, and leave the model sort of as it is. We could proceed in that way if we chose to, but if we did, we would then be deferring or avoiding what I think for me is a more fundamental question, which I think your study has actually dropped on the table in front of us, which is fundamentally, how do we make this service 10 times, 50 times more relevant to people? Now, I'll tell you what, I'll stop in a minute, give everybody else a chance, and then I would like to come back if I may, because take an example, for instance, I've not been a customer of the archive service. Now, please, in a sense, I'm a good example here, because please, I hope everyone feels I'm one of the biggest supporters of this service. I will champion it as a PFH, but I think it's quite illustrative that I've not been a customer of the archive service, and it's a bit like, why has that happened? Okay, because I've got needs, and I like all of us, I want to do my job better as a cabinet member, with all the eyes looking at me and all the pressures on. I need access to, often it's historical information, the right information to hand as quick as I can, skim through it, and basically be able to make better speeches, be able to interact better with colleagues, to make better decisions, dare I say, and to generally, land on the right spot with my colleagues faster and more reliably, so that we can run BCP better. Now, what I'd love to know, and please, nobody, it's not for answering now, is what's the archives role service job in that? How can it absolutely help me do that, right? And then you've got my custom, if that can be answered. And I don't think I'm unique in this respect. So I've not yet been a customer, and I'm just trying to think, how would I be, such that, and then frankly, sometimes we don't even need to talk about the money. Did I really say that in a meeting? But, sometimes, we think, quite rightly, Elizabeth, you put, the cost benefit, a pound invested, £3.38 returned and so on, good calculations. But, if this service somehow becomes indispensable for me and for several other people, we almost wouldn't quibble too much about the cost, or scrutinizing it too hard. We think, I just absolutely need that flipping service. It's like my right arm, Yes. And that's, anyway, I won't labour the point too much. That's where the service has got to go. That's the future of this service.
Can I come back to you, Mohan, because I completely agree with you, and this is why I'm saying about creating a whole, if you like, a different identity that is focused on the councils and is more around what we call records management, which is where, you know, the corporate records, the records you are creating are accessible and well organised and you can find them, and that the archive service is helping to run that records management system and providing that, maybe that hub where you go and look for those past records so you can make those good speeches. And when I was talking about going and talking to council services, I'm not talking about roadshows. What I'm talking about is, if you take as a comparator, the role of the National Archives is to secure the record of central government, and they actually go into individual departments where there is an assigned record officer and talk to them about managing the records of their department and passing over the long-term historical records to the National Archives. And there is obviously a staffing issue involved in that, but I would imagine the archive service doing something similar. They're not going to go and talk to all the staff about the archive service. Hopefully you could find a designated contact within various departments through which you can work to manage the record. But then, as you say, you've got to then make those records accessible to the users, i.e. the council staff. And this is where, you know, I don't know how it would look, and Sam, at your point, at this point, your heart might be dropping what I'm suggesting, but some kind of online portal where you can go and access these records directly and easily. They're easily flagged up and organised. You know, interesting for us that when we did this work, people did not know about the, how many reviews was it? 5, 6 previous reviews done of the archive service. All that money had been spent and nobody had read the reports. So straight, you know, your face says it's all, Mohan, really. So that is when I'm talking about service to the council, that is the kind of thing I'm trying to nail down or describe.
Thank you. I've got a couple of other people who would like to join in on the conversation, so we'll move on and come back to you, Mohan, on that. It's actually the area that you've picked up on was an area that I wanted to ask a question on, but I'll come to me last. Next, I've got Councillor Matt Hall.
Thank you, Jill. Elizabeth, you make quite a play in your report about the value of the connection between the History Centre and Exeter University and Bournemouth University. I was somewhat surprised that you, for whatever reason, and this is what I would like explained, why you haven't put in a section about expanding that. Now, that's not necessarily to expand the work with Exeter, for example, but if people, students, are willing to come from Exeter to Dorchester, they'll come from Bristol, they'll come from University of West of England, they'll come from Bath, they'll come from Reading, they'll come from Southampton. And I think there is a whole area where we can increase the knowledge of the service, we can increase the money coming in, and I think that would be a benefit to all. And I think as a sub question to that as well, I understand the need and the wish to digitize records and to make them more available, particularly for what you would class as the home historian. But speaking as a historian, as a qualified historian, many historians want to see the actual documents. Yes. You know, we do want to see that at the bottom of the document, as it were, it says page 1 of 1. You know, we don't want to be 1 of 2. We need to make sure that it's all there. Yes. And I think what we mustn't do is focus too heavily on one, which loses potentially another side of the business for the History Centre.
Yes. Yes, you've hit several nails on the head there, and I'm not going to disagree with any of them. The university side, I just focused on those two because those are ones with which the archive service already has very good operational relationships with, and they are keen to expand those relationships. I think if there's a desire to go out further, absolutely. But I was just focusing on those two because I keep coming back to the you know, that problem of the capacity of the archive service. They are a small staff, so working with two, but that doesn't mean to say they can't, for example, get involved with the heritage strategy of one of the universities and then suggest pulling in other universities. Absolutely. So yes, but I just wanted to focus, given the capacity, I just wanted to focus on what I knew were very strong relationships and had potential. But yes, please, more universities the better. I'm a great lover of universities. And yes, you're absolutely right. There is a danger that we can be preoccupied with digital. And this is why I talk about the physical and that really high quality interaction. And for example, the running of the search room, I have suggested a trialing, a pilot, because certainly as an archivist, the last thing I would want to do is undermine the quality of service to those who actually value and need to see those collections firsthand. And I know Sam and his team would certainly seek to keep that going. It's again this constant issue of capacity. But yes, I would agree. Physical, and I hope try to bring that out, that the physical still matters.
Yeah, can I just come back, Joe, on one point? Elizabeth, I understand the capacity issue, and I wonder whether that is possibly a benefit of involving more universities within the History Centre, because I'm just wondering whether there is a great opportunity for interns to be used by the History Centre from students at universities who've got some knowledge, some degree of knowledge, but want some wider experience within the historical and archives world, so that they could get the experience, and perhaps Sam can get some more staff, some knowledgeable staff, but without ruining his budget completely.
Yes. Yes, I mean, it's already, I think, Sam, you do host student placements occasionally. Is that right? Yes. And that is a very standard. Every summer, there you go. And that is very standard within archive services. I would wave a very large flag at this point. Having volunteer staff members, as it were, is very time consuming on managing those staff. You can't just bring them in, say there you go, and leave them. They actually, a volunteer will require a lot of management, and a student volunteer would. You can get useful work out of them, but you have to manage them. So yes, it's what archive services already do, but there's always a cost, as it were, to it. It's not free labor, if you like.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, needed to unmute. Richard, Councillor Richard Biggs next. I know that I'm bringing him in because he obviously needs to leave at 3. So, are you there, Richard?
I am. Thank you, Jill. Yes, I generally like the report. I think it is really detailed. There's a lot of work, and it does leave, you know, the recommendations are very much explore this area, so we don't have to, you know, it's leaving it open for the councils to discuss how to actually do it, and if that means working with other universities, etc., that's something to explore. So I think that there's plenty of scope within there, and so I would support all the recommendations. I think there's this area about the expansion, and this has always been a problem. It's sort of a can that's been kicked down the road, and we've tried everything, and obviously the failed heritage bid. And we've got a golden opportunity at the moment with one of our, you know, the council's, Dorset Council's headquarters being vacated soon. A potential to use some of that, you know, and I have mentioned that to the portfolio holder in regard to finance. He wasn't very keen on that suggestions, and I know I've mentioned it briefly to Sam. I'm sure he's not overly keen on it either, because it's not the ideal solution. But if we are looking at expanding, not just increasing the repository side, but actually doing something visitor attraction wise, I think there is some real mileage in that. But we've got a limited opportunity to that. So it's really perhaps a question for you, Jill, because that's in your community area, whether that's something you would consider exploring, or is that a closed door?
I think the problem we have at the moment, if we're talking about alternative uses for Southwark's house, is actually the requirement by by the Council for Capital Receipts. So I don't think I've got a cat and mouse chance of persuading either the finance portfolio holder or the portfolio holder for assets.
Well, I think the issue is that at some point we're going to have to spend some money, some serious amounts of money, and if we've got a building, not all of it, just a small section of it, that
but then you're
would
in
be
a
greatly
similar
reduced.
situation, are you not? You're in a similar situation that you would have you'd have the archive in two places. The way for the archive to work best is for the archive to be in a single place. If it was going to be in two places, then presumably it would be to the interest of BCP that they would have some in theirs and some in ours, rather than two lots in ours, if you see what I mean. So I think that that's probably not something that we're going to be able to get away with, shall we say.
Thank you.
I'd like to just explore a bit more the thing that I think is going to possibly attract our councils the most, and that's the potential of saving them money with the way that documentation is stored and retrievable, so saving duplication. Because I think that's the one thing that's going to perk up other people's ears that aren't on this board. I think they're going to say, that's interesting. If that's to show me how that's going to save us money. And I think that's something that I personally would be interested going forward, is actually doing a bit of work to see actually how much we duplicate, how much we could save by doing things slightly differently. We've already moved things across in the form of records to SAM. We're looking to explore that area a bit more. So my personal view is that if we were going to do, you're not going to change things immediately, are you? Do you know what I mean? We haven't got the resource to jump in and do all of it. So my personal view is if you were going to explore an area at all, then that is the area that you would explore to start with. In the meantime, Sam would be doing business as usual by talking to universities and dealing with the public and the sort of stuff that he's been fantastic at for all this time. But we haven't done very much with the way that we work with other departments of the council. And I think that's the bit that we need to explore as a very firm steer from me, start for 10. Because I think if we then say, and actually, if we did do this, and we actually took some of the resource that's doing it in the individual departments and used them in the archive service, we could save X. You would then be in a position that people would start to really sit up and notice. And if we could save X, could we use those people within the archive service for not just doing that, but for other activities? So that's kind of how I'm thinking that we perhaps ought to move forward with it to start. Mohan, would you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, Jill, just to agree completely with you, because I think that is absolutely way forward. You know, it's not quick; it won't be quick, and so on. It's a campaign; it's quite a long campaign. But we're always going to have documents, our two councils, and forgive me if I'm just talking about documents for a minute. I know it's broader than that. We've got to think about what to do with the mace in Poole, by the way. But if we just, for instance, just focus on documents for a minute, you know, at the risk of being blasphemous, you know, we say the word archives. We're talking here about a broader sort of document management service. Again, just to think of documents for a minute. I know this is only part of the scope, but for instance, to have that kind of conversation under the title of document management for departments. And I think rightly earlier on, Elizabeth, you said for legal reasons we need to keep things. Well, there's a much broader scope beyond legal requirements for various functions and public services to have documents to hand. And you know, it's almost a singularity of where they're kept, so that we've got the latest version ready to hand, for instance, we've got reliable information ready to hand, and it's almost a reliable go-to place, whether it's physically or in the online world as well. And it's so important right now. I'd rather not reveal how much of my, not every day, but almost every month, I'm just, you know, like hunting around for the right information. And if anything, the problem is the problem is not that I can't find any information. The problem is I've got about 5 different sources and there's 5 different things and there's too many things, and I end up with 20 megs of documents, right? And make sense of that, Mohan, to do my job. Whereas in sense, if somebody had almost like done something that I can't quite describe to say these are the definitive documents historically in this area, I could just go to that. I'll find it on a subdirectory, go there, and sort of, I don't even mind putting a request in and waiting a day for the documents to come back, for somebody to send me as a Dropbox or a zip file, or sorry, I'm showing my age, aren't I? But anyway, that kind of thing to come back and think, good, that they are the definitive documents on this sort of thing. So, and then of course, as a final thing, in case I've been too blasphemous, saying not archives, of course, those documents, in a sense, they are archives, aren't they? I mean, what is an archive? I mean, frankly, an archive is anything the day after the meeting, the day after the meeting happened is an archive, even if we're still using the document. So
and this you're absolutely right, Mohan. Would you like to be an archivist? You're very good at this. What I would say is what we call records management, which is what you're talking about, the management of the records that's currently used. That the two are sandwiched together. You don't get archives if you haven't done records management, and actually they require very similar skills. So I completely agree with you. Jill, just to assist you, I think you're absolutely right about that long campaign and starting to form it. Just to give you some suggestions of how you might do that, I would recommend you take 1 or 2 departments as focus to focus on. And I would recommend, and Sam, please add your reports, would be maybe planning and maybe adoption. The archive service has already done digitisation of some adoption records, so those start with some starter places, and planning in particular uses archives very heavily. And secondly, I would suggest that you talk to other archive services to understand how if they can help you articulate that cost saving, and in particular West Sussex Record Office, who very kindly gave me a case study that's the penultimate appendix, if you go right to the back of the report. I know it's a big report, and they've done a cracking job of handing over their records management to the archive service and amalgamating, I think it was, records all over the place into 3 managed locations, and they're all a lot happier as a council. But we can, Sam, we can talk and we can find other places that you could probably talk to as well to build that argument. I do apologise, and Mohan, I know you've asked this before, that I cannot just present you with some standard issue figures of this is what you save. It is a professional frustration.
That's right. No, can I just come back on just Elizabeth, what you're saying? I know you were sort of thinking of Jill and Dorset Council there. Just it's funny because there might be, if we went that way, we could do the same in BCP as well, planning and adoptions to start with. And in fact, there might be actually value in almost almost using the same departments in our 2 councils, almost like there's maybe a learning and so on by doing the kind of the project that way. Mind you, I must say that if I think of planning, I can imagine that area being one of the highest value for getting the document management sorted out, but not the easiest. And so in terms of almost like a phase 1 of this kind of project, is that I don't know how we blend the considerations of where's the highest value, but where's the most easy to get at to get quick wins. I've never thought of planning and quick wins in the same sentence, I must say. Because we've got, it's not any secret, we've got some quite formidable problems in planning in BCP for a variety of reasons. And just to get traction and get movement in there may be difficult, but the value undoubted.
What we have to do here, Mohan, I think, is actually, we can't discuss this and sort it out straight away today. So we're going to have to go away and have a think about it. I'm hoping that Sam is going to be able to use you, Elizabeth, just as a bit of a sounding board on occasions as we go forward with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that at this point, I'm going to draw this part of the meeting to a close and say thank you very much indeed for all your work. It's been really helpful. I just had one more, Simon Christopher, come in on this one before we move on to the main paper. So Simon Christopher, last Councillor Christopher, last speaker, please. You're on mute, Simon.
This will probably be my one contribution of the day for your benefit. I happened to be at Little Breedy near Dorchester the other day, and the Williams family owned a great deal of Dorchester, and I was reminded of a comment by the Williams' son-in-law, the late Admiral William Crawford. And Bill Crawford died many years ago, I knew, and he said you always have to hit the target, and he should know because he was the gunnery officer of the battleship that sank the Bismarck. And that is what records are about. You have to hit the target. You have to get the records when you want the records. If you can't get the records in time, you end up with a land charges search type situation. And that's why we always need to have sufficient staff whereby we can actually provide archive records on a timely basis. And I'm going to give you another story that you may think is totally boring, but I think it is relevant. And Jill is grinning. And that relates to the slaughter of sheep by dogs, which is quite topical. There is a case which says, it's actually called Williams versus Richards, which says that it is a criminal offence if you have a dog that kills sheep, even if it's not in a field. And there's some debate whether it's a 1970 case or a 1907 case. And the problem is that there's enough differences to the archive records and you can't seek clarification. It may not be important to anybody necessarily if you're living in Bournemouth, but if you lose sheep or whatever, it is relevant. And it's the same with archives. You need to be able to access those archives and get the definitive version, not a Wikipedia type answer to a question. We need to make sure that we have adequate resources. Jill has indicated that the records arguably should be in one place. And the difficulty is that if we move away from the environment in which the records are stored, well, clearly the records at the moment are stored in appropriate conditions. And going off to a second building or whatever won't necessarily provide that. I hope I haven't rambled too long.
Simon, I'm not going to get into building-based anything today.
No, I'm sure you wouldn't.
You're looking at how we move forward generally, and
Yes.
I think one of the things I think we can all agree today is that we need to actually ramp up in front of both of our councils the importance of the archive service, and it seems to me the best way to do that would be to be looking at what savings that could make for the council and what use the council can make of the service. So I think that's probably as far as I'm going to take this today, just to say thank you, Elizabeth, Heidi, and other colleagues that I know have been involved in this very much for all of the work. It's been great. And with that, I'm going to move on to the next item on the papers, which is item 7, which is actually the paper. Now, it's in my name, but I'm assuming, Sam, are you going to give this paper? Yeah?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. I'll be very brief because I think much of what is in the body of this report, Elizabeth's very articulately put. And I just wanted to put on record my thanks to her, to Heidi, and their colleague James for all the work they did and the sort of sensitive way that they explored what the service does and gave us a, I think a really very fair review of what we do and what we could do better. So I'm very grateful for that. I was really going to move on to section 5 of this report, if I may, missing out the main body, which repeats in the large part what has already been said. So to give you a little bit of service perspective, and I think I've already said I've shared this report. Obviously, I've digested it. I've shared it widely with the service, and I think we all feel there's a really excellent analysis of what we do, what we might do differently or better. But certainly there's a clear sort of pathway forward there for the service to develop in the future. I think some of the work that's already was described in the report it was already underway, which was acknowledged. Some of which we were thinking of and were coming to. But I think I would like to really focus, I suppose, on the main points that came up this afternoon, because I think the same messages are coming out time and time again. I think firstly the importance of digital, which is such a sort of platitudinous thing to point out in the current climate, but it is, and it's the way the service was moving all along. We're acutely conscious of our location in Dorchester, with a large body of Dorset's population living elsewhere, and our need to be able to provide access to materials off-site. So that's been an ambition and an aspiration for a long time. It's partly been a question of the invariable resources point, but also the technology to actually make that happen. And I think we're now in a much better position to move that forward. The second thing I think, which has occupied a lot of the conversation this afternoon, was around the question of records and records management. It's probably a very obvious thing for me to say, but if we were dealing with both councils on the same terms at the same time, in most respects, it would make life an awful lot simpler for the archive service, which, as you pointed out, is a small service which wishes to do its best by both councils, by both funders. But we have a very different relationship in terms of records management, for example, with Dorset Council on the one hand, than we do with BCP currently. Things have moved on a large way, very much a pace as a result of LGR. We've had very interesting discussions with colleagues in BCP in recent times over their records management strategy and the ways that we can assist. In Dorset Council, the records management function is actually going to be moving into and be managed as part of, alongside the archive service. So there's a great opportunity, I feel, to start doing things in a much more joined up fashion. We've struggled in the past, and I'm not interested in raking over history particularly, but I have pointed this out for some time, that the dual functions of the archive service are cultural heritage on the one hand, but corporate information management on the other. And it's the means to achieve that that's really eluded us, I think. But we're now in a much stronger position for a whole variety of reasons. A lot of support from a lot of other people. I'm not taking credit for this, but I think we've got an alignment of interests that's come about, which will make this much more possible. And I think as has been pointed out, for officers to be able to access information at their desktops without having to struggle to find things is what we're trying to achieve. And I think we understand the nature of the problem. It's just getting to it that's going to take time. I don't think there's a magic bullet. I think it's a long-term thing. I think digital preservation provides the answer to some of this, a lot of it probably. And again, for both councils to use the same solution through the Joint Archive Service would, for my opinion, be enormously helpful, because we would be dealing with the same things from two sets of children's services, for example, but one system, and that would be enormously helpful. So I think there's a great and interesting and really positive piece of work to be done around corporate records management, corporate memory and efficiencies, risk mitigation and so on, which we're already taking forward. And lastly, rather picking up on the point as well, it's already been mentioned, the question of storage space for the service, which is a known quantity, I appreciate, and I won't dwell on it now, but it is something I'd like to hopefully be able to take forward and analyse again in the light of LGR and the financial position we find ourselves in. So from the service perspective, really positive reception, lots of work already underway to take this forward. It's an iterative process, as you'll appreciate. There's an awful lot of information in here, an awful lot of things to take on board, and invariably and inevitably it is about prioritising things. We can't possibly do everything at the same time in the same way, although it would be nice to do that. Some of these things may be subject to much longer term processing, and some maybe need to be the subject of bids, financial bids for financial support and so on, transformational funding, that sort of thing. But I still think that there are lots of opportunities in there to be found. So moving on to next steps, I think much of this has already been said. We have a development plan, a new development plan, which will supersede or succeed our current service plan, which will be drawn up and produced for your consideration at the next time the board meets. And two particular pieces of work which actually form two of the recommendations that you'll see within this report relate to a review of the governance of the service, to be done in conjunction with and largely by, I suspect, the legal services departments of both councils, so that we have an analysis of what really suits and what is fit for purpose. If it isn't what we've got now, then what might it be? And secondly, a review of a 2013 options appraisal that was undertaken on the potential solutions for accommodation and increased accommodation, just to see whether or not those suggestions, those solutions as of 2013 are still relevant and valid. And I think that was all I was going to say, Councillor Haynes, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Sam. I think actually, you know, the report is very much a reflection of the work that Elizabeth and her team have done. I haven't got anything up on the screen. So unless there is anybody particularly wants to say anything, I'd just like to go straight to the recommendations, ladies and gentlemen, because I think that this is really going to be part of our work in progress. I did want, after the recommendations, to discuss the sort of timeline for the next meeting, because I think we need to keep the momentum going. You know, we're starting to think about how we're going to use this service, and that will mean that we need to be looking at more regular meetings and discussing, not necessarily in a formal meeting. We might decide the next meeting we want to be a little less formal and not a public meeting, but a meeting that we just have a proper discussion about the governance, and you know, you're not feeling you have to call each other councillor. and we can move to something that actually starts the ball rolling going forward. So
very supportive, that, Jill. Very, very supportive. Yeah.
Okay. So I've got 4 recommendations here. I'm proposing taking them on block. Is everybody happy with that? And I'm happy to propose from the chair that this is work in progress. This is nothing cast in stone. We've seen the report. We've now got more work that we need to do. We noted the recommendations of the report, and we're going to go away and have a look at this and see if we can't be a little more proactive, because it did feel as if this board had stalled for a number of years and it really needs to be moving forward. So I'm going to, have I got a seconder for that, please? Yeah, Mohan, thank you.
Happy to second, Chair.
And if there is, let's say this, is there anybody objecting? Let's put it that way. I'll do it the other way round. To that, otherwise I will take it as that is all accepted and unanimous. Just waiting. Okay, thank you very much. There was a suggestion that we might have the next meeting on site. Depends how fast we have the next meeting, because the room isn't big enough for us to be socially distanced the number of people we need to have. So then we can't be on site, at which point there's no point in being in another room, because that sort of defeats the object a bit. We might just as well do it online.
Jill, I put that comment in because I have to confess that I've never been to the building, and I thought that might be a chance to combine, you know.
Perhaps what we ought to do is we ought to organise a tour for those that are on the board, and we might not do that as everybody all at once, but what we might do is we might get Sam to take a couple of people round at a time, so that you're appropriately distanced and that you have the opportunity to ask the questions that you want to.
I would definitely appreciate that for myself, yes.
Yeah, okay, well I think that might be really helpful. So if we could have that minuted, Mohan, yeah?
Yeah, fine. Just as well as the tour that Marion's mentioned, I think just on your earlier point, Jill, about how soon to meet, I'd support us meeting again reasonably soon, and if it's online, so be it. It probably will be. But the board meets again, I think, in the spirit that you've described, informal if necessary, to we've got this report now, and so must now. I think Elizabeth said, you know, there's I think 4 previous reports, and they all went on the shelf. And let's not have this one going on the shelf and, you know, going the way of its predecessors. While it's warm and fresh out the oven, sort of thing. Let's use it and keep the conversation alive.
The date, Mohan, for you and I and the 2 directors to meet.
Okay.
So that will help us progress things through a bit more. And at that point, we'll decide whether it needs to be a formal meeting to agree potentially the new terms of governance, or whether it's an informal meeting just to discuss what we're going to be doing with the councils, or whether it's a bit of both, because you could have half an hour of informal and then move into a formal meeting.
Okay,
so,
fine.
you know, I'm quite good about all of that. I'm sure we can work that out between us.
It's fine.
Thank you. I'm now sorting myself out possibly to see if I've got anything else on the agenda, and I'm flicking frantically through this iPad, which isn't doing anything.
There is.
I'm getting there. Here we go. Right. So we've agreed the recommendations then at item 7. Thank you, everybody. I have no urgent items, and I don't believe we have any exempt business. So that brings me to a close of this meeting. To say thank you very much for everybody for attending. I think this is starting to look as if it might be a lot more positive going forward, because it has felt really stuck in the mud. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you in particular for our consultants again for coming to present. And thank you for the marvellous Sam and his team, who, well, we're just so lucky to have you all. Thank you very much. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.